of the country. Well, to further discuss the recent visit of Prime Minister Imran Khan to Malaysia, we are now joined by Mr. Hasaan Khawar, a senior economist and a political analyst. Mr. Khawar, welcome to Beyond the News, sir. So tell us, Prime Minister Imran Khan has visited Malaysia and he was the first one to visit since Mahathir Mohamad was sworn in again. How do you see the implications of this visit?
I believe that Imran Khan's visit to Malaysia is very, very important, both symbolically as well as from a learning perspective. Let's talk about the symbolism first. If you look at Mahathir Mohamad, he's someone who enjoys a global reputation. He enjoys reverence from schools of development economies, and people look at him very, very positively. But there are also some stark similarities in our situation, and I think that's where the learnings would come from. If you recall, about 2 decades ago, Malaysia not only said no to an IMF program when it was facing a crisis, it also came up with its homegrown agenda, something that was opposed by IMF back then, but was later appreciated by everyone and which worked for Malaysia. So that is one. But if you look at more recent times, Malaysia has been facing a debt problem, and Mahathir Mohamad has said that he would try to bring the country out of the debt crisis. So I believe there is a lot to learn from him on that count. The other area where I believe we can learn from him is the corruption, because as you know, there is a heavy crackdown right now going on in Malaysia after Mahathir took over, and this is something that Imran Khan has promised. So if you look at them closely, their manifestos
Imran Khan has
and their
given a
agendas
4-point
closely
agenda
resonate.
in Malaysia. He wants to increase foreign remittances, increase the foreign direct investment, less burden on the economy, and the fourth is to completely put an end to money laundering in the country. How do you think that will help from this current visit?
I believe the 4 elements that the Prime Minister has mentioned are all very relevant. So I believe his heart is at the right place. But as you know, that devil is in the details. So it depends on how exactly the government proposes to increase exports, to reduce money laundering, to increase remittances. And I think there is no way out. And if Pakistan has to rebound economically, these are the 4 areas where it should work. On exports, I believe it's not just about numbers, it's also about our export structure, because if you look at Pakistan, we have been exporting more or less the same products over the years, and I think right now is the time that we need to make our export base more sophisticated. We have to move towards more complex products, and that is where more value added is. In terms of money laundering, you know that Pakistan is already on grey list, and if we do not do enough very quickly, there is a chance that we might be placed on the blacklist. So I think all 4 issues that the Prime Minister has mentioned are very, very relevant, but I am very keen to see
and what about the bilateral trade between Pakistan
happen.
and Malaysia? Do you expect that to increase with the Prime Minister's visit currently?
So if you look at the joint statement between the 2 countries, it did mention the free trade agreement. But you know, Malaysia is not that big a trade partner for Pakistan in the last few years. If you look at the free trade agreement when it was signed, Malaysia was a significant partner. We had significant imports of palm oil from Malaysia back then. But once we signed the PTA with Indonesia, Indonesia has taken over as the largest palm oil exporter to Pakistan. And the reason for that is that probably Indonesian palm oil is more competitive for us. So while I believe that there is a lot of trade potential, there are a lot of areas where Pakistan can enhance exports to Malaysia, it's going to be a little difficult in the short term. And I believe the key to make that happen will be to relook at the free trade agreement and get some concessions on some of our potential products. Concessions that are at least as good as what Malaysia
seeing that
offers
both
to
countries
India.
have said that they face troubles of debt unsustainability, what lessons can we, or rather the Prime Minister's government, can learn from his Malaysian counterpart?
So there is one difference between the 2 countries that I would like to draw your attention upon, that Malaysia's total debt of about $250 billion is mostly ringgit denominated, but a significant proportion of our debt is foreign debt. So this is one difference that we need to be cognizant of. But if you really look at what Malaysia is doing to come out of the debt that it's facing, they have launched something which they are calling Hope Fund. And Hope Fund is about crowdfunding and getting donations to pay off the loans. Now that is something that Pakistan has already tried and tested in the past. This is not something which can help with the massive amounts of debts that we are facing or Malaysia is facing. But I think these gestures have a lot of symbolic value. But there are a number of other steps that Malaysia is taking. For example, it is looking at massively cutting down agencies that are inefficient or are not required. It is looking at cutting down large projects. It is also looking at cutting down ministers' salaries as a symbolic gesture to show that the focus is on austerity. And if you look at our government's focus and promises, we have pretty much made the same promises. So I think it's time that we move in that direction and we start slashing some of the expanding government that we have seen in the past few years.
Okay, isn't it peculiar that Malaysia cancelled some Chinese-backed projects due to the threat of unsustainable debt? But Pakistan, on the other hand, denies the role of CPEC in any debt unsustainability. Also, the foreign minister for China, Mr. Wang Yi, was in Pakistan, and he took out a slip from his hand and he said that the entire debt which Pakistan owes to China is around 6 to 7%. And the rest of it is it owns to international financial institutions. So blaming CPEC for a debt crisis, which the current government did earlier, was actually incorrect. And now the Prime Minister is saying that the CPEC is not the biggest problem for our debt crisis. What do you have to say on that?
So I personally do not believe that CPEC is one of the leading causes for our piling debt load. And as you said, that the CPEC liabilities are a minuscule part of our debt. If you look at the analyst projections, they believe that at any given time in the next few years, the maximum repayments that we'll have to make would amount to something like $2.5 to $3 billion, which is about 15 days of our equivalent to 15 days of our import bill. So that's not massive. But if you look at the debt problem, our foreign debt is nothing else but accumulated current account deficit. And our local debt is nothing more than our accumulated fiscal deficit. So the causes for this piling debt are deep-rooted, and unless and until
Mr. Hasaan, there's a lot of, I'm sorry to interject here, but there's a lot of ambiguity regarding the CPEC in Pakistan currently. We don't know what the government actually did in China. The transcripts haven't come to us. We don't know the deals that have been made. What is your take on the current CPEC and projects right now in the country? Are they working? Have they been have they halted? Are they reconsidering the projects? And what do you have to say on that?
So I believe that the ambiguity you are referring to pertains more to the immediate aid that we were expecting from China, and the government said that it cannot disclose the details. I believe after some initial confusion, there is some clarity on CPEC, and the Prime Minister's visit to China helped in addressing that ambiguity. There is clarity that whatever projects that are already underway and are financially closed, there is going to be no renegotiation on that from either party.
Okay, Iqbal today stated that the Prime Minister has failed to tell the public about what deals were made in China, and he asked the Prime Minister and his government to be more transparent about CPEC. What do you have to say on that?
I would absolutely support that statement in general, that the governments on any issue need to be more transparent. I do understand the concern that if there are some Chinese concerns about not disclosing the immediate aid package, that could be one thing. We have faced similar conditions before, but you know that even with negotiations with IMF, they have demanded the details for all our contracts with CPEC, and government has very clearly stated that it's going to share all CPEC project details with IMF so that they know what are the problems that we are facing.
Okay, then on that note, should we actually replicate the Malaysian model? Because Malaysia, to my knowledge, said that we don't want $23 billion worth of CPEC projects in China, in Malaysia. And China did not really like that. But considering that we share a border with China and we have a different relationship than Malaysia does with China, what do you think we should learn from Malaysia?
So I think you very rightly partly answered your own question that I would not draw an immediate parallel. China is our next door neighbor, and for Pakistan, China holds immense importance. So I don't think that cancelling CPEC projects is the way to go, but we can learn from Malaysia. And what we can learn from Malaysia in this is that Malaysia is prioritizing those projects which are in the national interest. They are well prepared when they go for negotiations. and they are looking at foreign direct investment which creates direct employment in their country or transfers technology.
Okay. Do you expect the PTI-led government will be able to introduce reforms to ensure good governance as they mentioned in Malaysia earlier?
I believe there is no other way for the government. If you look at PTI and if you look at the expectations that people
I'm sorry, but
PTI,
isn't good governance a too vague a term to define? I mean, what is good governance? Are they talking about morality, ethics of our bureaucrats, or are they talking about corruption? Or good governance is so ambiguous, it doesn't appeal to me, because good governance could be anything. What do you have to say on that? Is it too vague a term for you as well?
No, I don't think it's vague. As you rightly said, that the term good governance has many dimensions. And if you look at what the current government is trying to do in terms of its task forces, they look at good governance in terms of accountability, in terms of austerity and government restructuring, in terms of civil service reforms. And this is where the government is focusing. Now, I, like all the other citizens of this country, are very eagerly looking forward to the task forces reports and to see what the government actually is proposing to do. But I think government is fairly clear in terms of what it means, where it needs more clarity.
Okay, now coming to the Prime Minister's statements himself, he said that he wants to rid Pakistan of foreign loans. Will major economic initiatives be undertaken anytime soon to improve our exports and curtail money laundering in the country?
Yes, absolutely. As we discussed earlier, that reducing debt load has been Prime Minister's promise for a long time, and to address the debt problem, the foreign debt problem, you will have to increase remittances, you will have to increase exports, and you will have to have a reduced current account deficit. And when you talk about local domestic loans, it is about curtailing fiscal deficit, and that is where the government's focus should be. And this could only happen if you reduce government's expenditure, you cut down wasteful spend.
Mr. Hasaan, it was a pleasure to have you on the show, sir. Thank you so much.